I saved a pregnant Doberman who was beaten and left to die. What happened next broke me. The morning in Redwood Springs was so cold my breath turned into smoke, and as I took Cooper out back to dump the trash with my mind still fogged from waking up, the world shifted from half-dream to nightmare in the span of 3 seconds, freezing every nerve in my body. A drunken man stood wobbling in the patchy snow, his face bruised red from alcohol. His eyes bloodshot and sleepless like something feral dragged out of a dark corner. He swayed hard, a rough wooden club in his right hand, and on his left, he was holding a pregnant Doberman by the neck. A tiny puppy barely 5 months old, her black and tan fur smeared with mud, and her ribs showing starkly beneath her skin. Her belly bulged unnaturally, and her legs kicked weakly in the knife-sharp morning air, as if she was trying to remember how to move. She made no sound. She didn't fight. She only breathed thin as a thread about to snap. I froze where I stood, staring into an empty alley where no door opened, no curtain shifted, no neighbor peeked out to see what horror was unfolding. There was no one. Only me, Cooper, and a fragile life dangling like discarded trash from the hand of a drunken, soulless man. Cooper let out a low, sharp growl that cut through the cold. The man looked at me with an expression so detached it made my blood turn to ice. Walk away. Unless may mun chet chung vina. His voice was raspy thick, soaked in liquor, but it wasn't the sound that strangled my breath. It was the way his fingers tightened. The puppy let out a faint, crushed whimper, not a cry, but the noise of a life being squeezed to the end, desperately trying to hold on to its last drops of air. I shouted before I even realized it. "Stop! Put her down!" He laughed, a short, warped, filthy sound. "I'm taking it to the dump. This one's useless. Trash." Then he jerked her neck. The tiny body of Misty snapped upward, like a leaf ripped off its branch, and I heard the thin, broken breath leave her so faint I would have missed it if I blinked. Her eyes opened just a sliver. Not wide, not begging. Just the hollow, exhausted gaze of something pushed to the very border of death and still searching for even one reason not to let go. That gaze locked onto mine, and in that instant I knew if I turned away, she would die right there in the snow. Not an hour later, not on the road, right here, in his hand, in the mud and frozen morning. I pulled out my phone. He took a step toward me, raising the club. Cooper moved instantly, planting himself in front of my legs, his growl deepening until it vibrated through the snow like a taut cable ready to snap forward. The man narrowed his eyes. "Put that phone down. Last warning." I pressed the call button to 911, my hand shaking, breath stuck in my throat, heart slamming like it wanted out of my chest. 911, what's your emergency? I didn't take my eyes off Misty. "There's a dog, a pregnant Doberman. He's choking her. Please send officers right now." Roy Maddox stomped the ground, cursed, and yanked the puppy higher as if daring me to watch him do worse. Cooper's snarl rose so loud the snow around us seemed to tremble. And in that moment I felt 3 things with absolute clarity. He could kill the puppy right now. 2, if I stepped back, no one else would save her. 3, I had only one path left: stay. Face him, hold him here until the police arrive. I tightened my grip on the phone. "I'm not going anywhere. Put her down." Roy bared his teeth. "Good. Let's see how long you last." Cooper moved half a step closer, ready to launch if the man twitched so much as a finger. The cold wind whipped across us, but I couldn't feel it anymore. All I heard was Misty's broken breath, Cooper's growl, and the crushing pulse inside my chest. A normal morning in Redwood Springs had become a battleground because one tiny life was fighting for one more minute. And I knew from that moment on I could not take a single step back. My name is Evan Brooks. 48 years old, living in the mountain town of Redwood Springs, Oregon, a place where winter arrives too early and people always seem busy avoiding their own sadness as if silence were a safer kind of armor. I came here 10 years ago after my marriage cracked apart, and my only daughter died from illness, believing Redwood Springs held the kind of quiet I thought I needed: pine forests, fog, empty roads, and the feeling that no one expected me to speak unless I wanted to. Cooper, my golden retriever, was the only thing that kept the house from becoming a mausoleum of memories. He was the one living creature I allowed in after losing my daughter, partly because I couldn't stand absolute silence, partly because I needed a reason to open the door each morning. My life drifted on like that. Silent. Slow. Enough to live. Not enough to die. And then that morning happened. Roy Maddox wasn't a stranger in Redwood Springs. Anyone who lived here longer than 6 months knew exactly who he was. He was the unemployed, heavy-drinking type, quick to explode, often involved in bar scuffles and always slipping away untouched because no one wanted the headache of dealing with him, not even the police. Not because he was dangerous, but because he wasn't afraid of anything, and men who aren't afraid tend to do things no one expects. But there was one thing even Redwood Springs didn't expect from him. He dared to lay hands on a pregnant Doberman, not a frail puppy, not an abandoned old dog, but a grown Doberman carrying life inside her belly so heavy it made each step a labor. I looked at Misty, the name formed in my mind within seconds, and I realized something almost immediately. She had once been a house dog cared for, fed well-groomed, likely bred for litters. But now her body was nothing but mud-matted fur bruises running along her ribs and a swollen belly that forced her breath into short, strained bursts. I didn't know what he had done to her the night before. I didn't know how she ended up in his hands. But I knew one thing for certain: she hadn't walked to him on her own. You have to understand something about Redwood Springs. People here are masters of silence. They stay quiet when neighbors fight, when children walk alone in the snow, and especially when someone does something wrong that doesn't directly harm them. They close their doors softly, pull their curtains tight, and whisper, "Not my business." I used to be one of them. I used to believe silence was how you survived. But that morning, as I saw Misty dangling from Roy's hand like a piece of trash, her deep brown eyes locked onto mine, and I remembered my daughter's eyes on her hospital bed, the last plea of a life slipping away. "Don't leave me. Please don't leave me." I didn't know why that memory returned in that exact moment. Maybe because the two pairs of eyes were the same, filled with exhaustion, fear, and that fragile hope that someone would choose to stay. And suddenly, I understood why my legs refused to step back. Why did my hands shake so hard, but I still managed to dial 911? Why Cooper stepped in front of me without a command, as if he sensed I was shaking from something far deeper than the cold. Because if I walked away, I would be choosing to let another living being die simply because I was afraid. And I had lived too long with that kind of weight. I couldn't carry another one. It's not your business. Roy said it. The people of Redwood Springs said it. My entire life had once said it. But Misty, this trembling, heavy-bellied Doberman fighting to stay alive for herself and the unborn lives inside her. She looked at me as if asking, "Will you stand with me?" And I understood then. This wasn't just my business. This was my one chance not to be the man who kept turning away from pain. Cooper nudged my leg softly. A small reminder. We're not those people. For a moment, Redwood Springs stopped being a cold town watching from behind closed curtains. There was only me, Cooper, Roy Maddox, and Misty standing on the razor's edge between life and death. And I knew I had to stand my ground. I took another step toward Roy Maddox, not because I was brave, but because the look in Misty's eyes made it impossible to stay still, the kind of moment where your body moves before your mind has time to weigh the danger. The morning light in Redwood Springs fell across Misty's body, and I saw every bruise, every streak of dirt clinging to her back. The once sleek black and tan coat now clumped into muddy patches, as her swollen belly sagged so low it nearly brushed his wrist every time he jerked her upward. She wasn't just pregnant, she was in her final weeks, her skin stretching tight enough that I could see small movements underneath tiny lives fighting to survive in the dark while their mother trembled in fear and pain. Roy yanked Misty's neck again. A sharp, broken breath snapped out of her thin and tight like a fraying string about to break. I felt Cooper stiffen beside me, lowering his body, head-dipped fur bristling as a deep growl rose from somewhere primitive inside him, and every part of it said, "Stop. Now." Roy glanced down at Cooper, then lifted his gaze to me, a crooked smile pulling across his face until my throat went cold. "This dog ain't gonna live," he sneered. "She's bad. Hard to birth. I'm not wasting money on something useless." For a moment, I thought I misheard him. Hard to birth, struggling in pain. And his answer was to drag her to a dump and let her die there. My breath jammed in my throat. Misty tried to move one hind leg, kicking weakly in the air, not in defense, but as if searching desperately for the ground that wasn't there. She hung too high, her heavy belly crushing her breath, her body shuddering as every squeeze of his hand forced her chest to lock tight. "Stop it," I said, my voice cracking despite how hard I tried to steady it. "You're killing her." Roy spat into the snow. "She's done. A dog like this doesn't keep." "After I deal with her, the litter ain't bothering nobody either." I froze. Those 2 words, the litter, hit me like a blow, and I felt my heart drop straight to the ground. It wasn't just Misty. There were 4 or 5 tiny lives flickering inside her, trying to exist. "You have no right," I said, slow and sharp. "This is a crime. I told you. It's not your business." Roy roared and lifted the club. Cooper barked his first full bark so loud it cracked through the alley like a hammer blow. Misty jolted in terror, her eyes flooding with the raw fear of a mother who knows she might die before she ever gets to protect her young. I didn't know if my shaking came from fear of Roy or the pain of watching Misty fight for air, but my legs kept moving anyway, one step, then another. "Put her down," I said. "I called the police. They're coming." Roy hesitated for half a second. Then he laughed, a sound that told me he was about to do something worse before he ran. He shifted the club, turning his wrist the way a man does when he means to strike the very thing he's holding. "Fine," he said, breath reeking of alcohol. "I'll make it quick," I shouted. "Don't." But the sound I heard next wasn't the club. It was Misty's whine, a thin, fading note like the last plea of something clinging to the final thread of life. I lunged forward on instinct, and Cooper lunged with me. Roy stumbled back, jerking Misty so violently her whole body slammed into his hip, her lower half dropping as her hind legs scraped the dirty snow, her belly striking the edge of a trash bin. She let out a long, broken gasp, her eyes blurring with pain. It felt like my heart tore in 2. "You're hurting her." I choked. Roy answered. "That's the point." In that short moment, maybe only seconds, I saw everything. Misty is trembling on the verge of collapse. Her belly spasms with every breath, her head turned toward me, and in her eyes a question so heavy I could hardly stand under it. "Will you stand with me?" I clenched my fist. "I'm here," I whispered. "I'm not walking away." And I stepped forward again just as the police siren wailed at the end of the alley. The police siren echoed from the far end of the narrow Redwood Springs alley, ricocheting off the brick walls like a heavy warning that cut straight through the cold morning air, and when Roy Maddox turned his head, his bloodshot eyes shifted from rage to panic in a single twitch. But drunk men rarely run the moment fear hits them. They almost always do something worse first. And I saw that intention forming in his stare before he even moved. He jerked Misty's neck so violently that the heavy body of the pregnant Doberman snapped upward and dropped like a sandbag, forcing a broken puff of air out of her no sound, just a thin wisp of breath fading like morning mist. Cooper barked a deep explosive roar as if every ounce of fury inside him had ignited at once. "Put her down." I shouted, my voice cracking so sharply I barely recognized it, but Roy didn't stop. He tightened his grip muscles, trembling, eyes filled with the wild stubbornness of a man who refuses to lose. "The police are here," I said, trying to steady my voice. "You can't do anything else now." "Oh, I can." He backed toward the trash lot, lifting the club high. "I'm finishing it now. This one ain't worth living." For a moment, the world slowed as if someone pressed a button to drag time through mud. Misty's belly pulsed once, a desperate final reflex from the puppies trapped between fear and violence, and her half-open eyes locked onto mine with no blame, no anger, just one last pleading question. "Please, don't let him do this." I lunged on instinct, but Roy had already swung. And just then, the officers' voices cracked through the alley like gunfire. "Drop the weapon, put it down. Now." Two deputies, Harris and Officer Lane, charged from the patrol car, their guns raised, their movements sharp and absolute. Roy froze. 1 second. 2. Then he turned toward me, hatred boiling up behind his drunken stare. "You brought him fine. Let me show you the price for that." He hoisted Misty even higher, lifting almost her entire trembling weight off the ground. Misty whimpered, her belly spasming like it wanted to scream, but no longer had the strength. Harris shouted again, "Put the dog down. This is felony. Abuse." Roy's teeth clenched, his knuckles turning white as bone, but he still didn't release her. Officer Lane moved 2 long strides, a grab, a twist, Roy's howl ripping through the alley. And Misty fell. She fell straight into my arms. Her body was limp, warm, but cooling, her breaths thin and torn, her swollen belly twitching in irregular spasms. I dropped to my knees in the snow, cradling her head with both hands, holding her belly up so it wouldn't slam against the frozen ground. "It's okay, Misty," I whispered, my voice thick and breaking. "It's okay, sweetheart. I've got you now." Cooper stood pressed against me like a shield of fur and fury, barking at Roy so violently I thought his throat might tear. Behind us, Lane pinned Roy to the ground while Harris cuffed him. It took both men to hold him down because Roy wasn't just drunk. He was feral. He screamed, thrashed, and cursed, but now he was only background noise. All I could hear was Misty's breathing, shallow, fading, sliding away from the world one tremor at a time. "Evan, you need to get her out of here now," Harris shouted. I lifted Misty in my arms. She didn't fight. Her head hung limp. Her belly convulsed in small, frightening spasms, dangerous signs for any pregnant dog, let alone one abused like this. "I know," I said, my hands shaking so violently I had to tighten my grip just to keep from dropping her. Holding Misty close, I ran like the earth behind me was collapsing, with Cooper racing at my side. I yanked open the truck door, laid Misty across the back seat, one hand supporting her belly so it wouldn't press against anything. "Stay with me, Misty," I said as the engine roared to life. "Stay with me. We're almost there." I didn't glance at the rearview mirror. I didn't care what Roy screamed. There was only one truth left. I had to reach the Redwood Springs veterinary clinic before Misty lost another breath. So I hit the gas. Hard. Not to escape a man, but to outrun death itself. When I pushed through the emergency room doors of the Redwood Springs veterinary clinic, the sudden warmth inside nearly made my knees buckle, because even though I'd held Misty against me the entire drive, her body was still so cold it pierced straight through my jacket, like needles of winter steel. "Put her here now." Dr. Collins barked as he dragged the heated table to the center of the room, and the moment I lowered Misty onto it, the weight of her collapsed like a soaked cloth slipping from my hands. Her head tilted to the side. Her breathing nearly vanished. Nurse Megan hooked up an IV line with quick, precise movements. "Severe hypothermia," she murmured. "Doctor." Collins pressed his stethoscope to Misty's chest. He said nothing for the longest seconds of my life. "Her heart rate is dropping," he finally exhaled. "And her abdomen. God, there are signs of internal trauma." My jaw clenched until it hurt. I knew what that meant. Not only was Misty dying, her unborn litter was dying with her. Collins placed a hand on her swollen belly and pressed lightly. Misty jerked a tiny cry, escaping her more like a strangled breath than a sound. "She's in significant pain," he said, his voice lowering, "and likely has been for hours." I drew in a breath, but the air in the room only made my chest ache deeper. Cooper lay directly under the table, his muzzle flat on the cold tile eyes locked on Misty without blinking. "Will she make it?" I asked. Collins didn't answer immediately. He adjusted the heater, checked ocular reflexes, then looked me in the eye. "I won't lie, Evan. She's on the edge. Everything depends on how her body fights in the next few hours," Megan added softly. "Dobermans are strong. But late-term pregnancy is hard." Nobody spoke after that. Only the monitors, the IV drip tapping tiny drops, and Misty's thin, ragged breaths filled the room. Time moved more slowly than anything I'd ever felt, as if the emergency ward existed in a different dimension altogether. Dr. Collins worked non-stop warm IV fluids, anti-shock injections, low-dose pain relief, fetal heart monitoring. When he placed the sonar probe on Misty's belly, I forgot how to breathe. One tiny flicker appeared on the screen, then another, then two more. Megan gasped. "They're still here." 4 of them, weak heartbeats, but present. Collins looked at me, voice tired, but carrying a thin thread of hope. "They're fighting. She is too." I didn't know when I sat down, but suddenly, Cooper was beside me, resting his head on my knee. I placed a hand on his back, and for the first time in years I felt my hand shaking in a way I couldn't control. "Misty," I whispered, unsure if she could hear. "You have to try. Not just for you, but for your babies too." As if answering me, Misty's belly tightened in a faint, tiny contraction. Barely there, but real. Near midnight, her temperature kept swinging, sometimes rising as if she were stabilizing, then crashing suddenly, like the floor dropping out beneath her. "Her body is fighting itself," Collins said. "Pain, blood loss, fear, stress, they're all working against her." I stood close enough to feel her breath trembling under the heat lamp. "Evan," Collins added gently, "you should know. Many pregnant dogs in this condition choose to let go, not from weakness, from pain." I swallowed hard, the words cut deep. I bent close to Misty, just inches from her ear, wanting her to hear every syllable. "Misty, don't give up. I'm here. Cooper is here. This whole town walked past you. But I didn't, and I won't leave." Cooper whined, softly, ears pinned back like he was adding his own small prayer to the antiseptic-scented room. I placed my hand lightly on Misty's belly, barely touching, and felt a kick. Weak, but alive. The breath left my chest like someone had lifted a stone off it. "She has a reason to fight," I told Collins. He nodded. "And someone to fight for." I didn't answer him, but I knew he was right. Around 3 a.m., after what felt like a dozen hours pulled tight like wire, Collins finally said, "Her heart rhythm is stabilizing. If she makes it to sunrise, she has a chance." Sunrise, just a few hours away. I pulled my chair as close to the table as I could get. I placed my hand beside Misty's paw, not touching, just close enough for her to sense me. Cooper curled beneath my legs, eyes open and unblinking, and I sat there waiting for a sunrise I had never prayed for so desperately in my life. Dawn hadn't even touched the sky yet, but the emergency room inside the Redwood Springs Veterinary Clinic was already glowing under cold white lights, and I watched Misty lying on the table with her body trembling slightly under each heavy breath, as every sign suggested she was stable for the moment. Colin said the same, but I knew nothing was certain until the night fully passed. Around 4 a.m, when I'd closed my eyes for only a few seconds, the heart monitor released a soft, warning tone, not loud, but sharp enough to tear me upright. "Megan," I called. The nurse rushed over, glanced at the screen and spoke quickly. "Her heart rate is dropping." Those 3 words cracked something inside my chest. Collins burst in with a tray of instruments, checking Misty's eye response, but there was no strong reaction, just a faint tremble of her eyelid, weak as though she were slipping into someplace far away. No, he muttered, his hands moving non-stop, adjusting fluids, raising the heat level, massaging her chest with urgent precision. Cooper jumped to his feet and released a sound I had never heard from him before, a long, aching whine, as if he understood Misty was slipping away from us. The monitor beeped again, then again. "Misty, Misty, look at me." I bent down, close to her face, my voice breaking. "You are not going anywhere." "I'm right here," Colin said quickly. "Her blood pressure is crashing. Her body's giving out. If we don't pull her back in the next few minutes." He stopped because he didn't need to finish. I placed my hand on Misty's head. She was colder than before. Her breaths are shorter. Her belly no longer tightened the way it had hours earlier, only twitching faintly, like the final reflexes of something on the edge of surrender. "Evan, Megan," whispered sometimes. They let go because they think they're alone. Those words cut deeper than anything Collins had said. Alone. I leaned down until my breath mingled with hers. "No," I whispered softly, but with all the certainty I had left. "You're not alone. I'm here. Cooper is here. We're not leaving you the way others did." I felt something wet fall from my face onto her muzzle. I didn't know if it was a tear. I just knew I couldn't breathe. The monitor stretched into a thin, flat line. Then her heartbeat flickered up, then dropped, then flickered again, small as a dying ember in cold wind. Collins stared at the screen, his hands trembling for a second. He tried to hide. "Keep talking, Evan. She can hear you." I placed my hand gently against Misty's chest, terrified of hurting her. Cooper braced his paws on the edge of the table, lowering his head until his nose brushed Misty's ear. Misty didn't open her eyes, but her chest lifted a little higher than the breaths before. Slow, but with strength. "That's it. That's it," I whispered like a prayer. Megan looked at the monitor and gasped. "Her heart rate. It's rising." Collins leaned in ear to her chest, then lifted his head toward me. "She hasn't given up." I had to hold on to the table to keep from collapsing. 10 minutes later, Misty's temperature rose by 0.3 degrees, then 0.5. The fetal heartbeats on the sonar flickered brighter. "Oh, God," Megan murmured, her hands shaking. "The puppies are fighting too." I rested my forehead gently against Misty's. I didn't know if dogs understood words, but I whispered anyway. "You're not just fighting for you. You're fighting for them." As if completing the moment, Cooper whimpered and pressed his head softly against Misty's belly. Collins watched and let out a shaky breath. "I've done this for 30 years, and there are moments when medicine can't save them. Only faith can. When the first light of dawn spilled across the clinic windows, Misty opened her eyes, very slightly, very slowly. But her brown eyes looked straight at me, awake, aware, alive. I almost broke down in tears. Misty. "Good morning," I whispered. She didn't bark, didn't whine, didn't try to move much. She only nudged her head into my palm, a soft touch like a breath of wind. But I knew that was the moment she returned to this world. That was the moment she chose to stay. That was the moment she trusted me. Cooper licked Misty's nose. Misty blinked an intentional, conscious blink. I looked at Collins. He nodded. "She made it through the night, Evan. She's going to live." And I didn't hold back my tears. I had witnessed a life return from the very edge. Spring arrived in Redwood Springs earlier than usual, the melting snow turning into glittering streaks across the walkway as the first sunlight of the season laid a gentle, forgiving glow over the clinic after the longest night of my life. 3 days after Misty clawed her way back from the edge, Dr. Collins said she was strong enough to come home so long as I stayed beside her and monitored every breath. I laid a thick mattress in the living room where the morning light poured through the windows and washed her brown coat in a soft honey warmth, and Cooper lay pressed against her like a silent golden bodyguard sworn to protect her with every heartbeat he had. That morning, I heard a sound as faint as wind brushing a glass rim. Misty whimpered. I sat up instantly. Collins had told me, any moment now, if she's ready. And today, she was ready. Misty looked at me, not panicked, not afraid, but with a calmness reserved for mothers who know they are finally safe. So I pulled the birthing box closer and watched as she stepped inside on her own, weak but determined, her belly lowering gently, as if her body had finally found the place it had been searching for to let go. "It's okay, girl," I whispered. "Just do what nature built you to do." Cooper sat beside the box, with his head tilted, his amber eyes following every rise and fall of her breath. Then, the first tiny sound appeared. A soft, fragile mew, small, trembling, but unmistakably alive. I covered my mouth, unable to believe what I was witnessing. Then came the second, the third, the fourth. 4 tiny lives, wet, shaking but breathing. Misty licked each newborn, gently pulling them close to her belly, her movements slow, loving, impossibly tender, with no trace of the terror from the night Roy Maddox held her by the throat. There was no chaos now, no clubs swinging, no icy breath of death hanging over her, only the warmth of life. I slid down onto the wooden floor, leaning back against the wall as tears fell freely, as if my body had been waiting for this moment longer than I realized. Cooper turned toward me and nudged my hand softly as if to say, "We did it." And Misty looked at me with those deep, quiet brown eyes, holding my gaze for a long, long moment, as if speaking something that didn't require language at all. "Thank you for staying. Thank you for not leaving me." I placed my hand on her head. "I didn't save you," I whispered. "You saved me from becoming someone who turns away." Outside the window, the snow melted into sparkling droplets falling from the eaves, each drop sounding like a heart settling back into its rightful place. Inside that small home in Redwood Springs, a Doberman mother found her life again. 4 tiny souls took their first breaths, and a lonely man rediscovered what compassion truly meant. It was a miracle, not loud, not showy, but real enough to make you believe in kindness again.